Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We've got a great panel on to weigh in on whatever Gavin Newsom is doing out in California and his public health officials. We'll get into that. We also have Jeff Stein on for an update on the economy, and Matt Stiller on to talk about what else, the big tech hearings that happened in this town this week. But we wanted to start with an update on coronavirus. Yesterday, we hit grim milestone of 250,000 American deaths. The numbers from yesterday look incredibly bad and not improving at this moment.
No, they really don't. Let's throw the map up there as well, because this is important to see. It's basically ripping through the interior of the country. I thought we wanted to take a moment and cover this in detail today because it's causing basically mass social disruption. Everybody in the country is wondering, can I go to Thanksgiving? Are my kids going to be able to go to school? There are new restrictions that are now rolling in across America. We actually have a list of just the updated ones from yesterday. Let's throw that up there. We have California. We have several major cities: Philadelphia, Kansas City, Chicago, New Mexico, Washington, Iowa. There are mask mandates. There are restrictions on people. And there's a lot of uncertainty, Krystal. Yesterday I did my radar on whether I thought that a lockdown was sustainable. And I said, look, in the midst of no stimulus, I don't think it is, because it means that you are going to murder your existing small business stock in any place in the country where the temperature is below 50 degrees. It's 34 degrees this morning here in Washington. I walked past a restaurant yesterday, which 2 weeks ago was full on the outside. There were two people there in mittens, trying to eat outside. It's not going to happen anymore. So what are you going to do if you close indoor dining? I just don't know if it's sustainable or possible from this point forward. And it's a devil's choice that Washington has put us with. But the thing is everybody is not handling this well across the board.
It's a complete Sophie's choice.
Yeah.
And this is the exact scenario that we have long feared, that Washington would not do enough to keep people attached to their jobs, to allow them to sustain their businesses, and that when you were facing that fall and winter spike, which has long been unfortunately anticipated, that people would be exhausted by this and that the choices would be so grim that you're basically like, look, you can either risk your health. And look at the number. 1,923 deaths yesterday. Yeah. That's almost to the height of where we ever were. Some of the worst numbers that came in early in the crisis was 2,000 plus deaths a day.
It is.
We are headed right back towards those types of numbers. It's spread everywhere across the country. The worst hotspots, as you can tell on the map, are in the Midwest. So that's one choice is okay, we're going to just leave the economy open and we're going to put people at risk. The other choice is you're going to destroy everybody's small business. In a sense, though, we talked to Richard Wolff yesterday, Professor Richard Wolff, is it even really a choice? Because as long as the pandemic is raging, people are going to curtail their activities anyway. So you're only going to be able to keep so many small businesses alive without stimulus, even if you do say, look, we're not going to have any new lockdown restrictions.
That's right. So it's meager choice here, meager choice there. Do you give people a chance because they've basically been left to fend for themselves? And it makes me really angry, especially at a holiday time like this, where a lot of people are, they're facing questions. Do I gather with my family? Do I not? So many people are grappling with these problems. And then also parents sending their children to school who are basically on a razor's edge. And the thing that also, it's not just Washington who is handling this poorly. We saw this yesterday from the governor and the mayor of New York.
Outrageous.
In the way that they had the millions of children who go to New York City public schools were left dangling in the wind for a 5-hour wait by Bill de Blasio on a press conference to announce that ultimately they were going to close the schools. But before that, Governor Cuomo had a press conference, and when a reporter had the temerity to challenge him on whether there was, some confusion on whether schools were going to open the next day, by the way, they ended up doing that. Look at how this guy reacted. Take a listen to this.
So what are you talking about? What are you talking about? You're now going to override. We did it already. That's the law. An orange zone and a red zone. Follow the facts.
I'm still confused.
Well, then you're confused.
I'm confused. And
then I'll tell you what, Jimmy.
Parents are still confused as well. The schools in New
they're
York
not
City
confused.
tomorrow.
You're confused.
No, I think
Read
parents
the
are
law.
very confused as well.
Read the law, and you won't be confused.
Parents aren't confused.
They actually were
You're
very confused because they had to
Yes.
wait until the end of the day and only had several hours, along with educators and principals, on whether they were going to have a damn school the next day. Can you imagine?
The arrogance of this guy to be outraged that you dare ask a simple question about whether schools are going to be open the next day, that everyone's lives revolve around. What am I going to do if my kids are going to be at home? How am I going to do it? Do I have to take off work? Do I have to line up childcare for teachers trying to plan
move my shift around?
I mean, this is insane. And like you said, de Blasio pushed off a press conference where he was supposed to make this announcement by 5 hours. And let's not forget, by the way, people, when they ultimately did close schools, because they put in early on, before we knew as much about school spread as we do now, they instituted this limit of, okay, if the virus test rate goes over 3%, then we're going to shut it down. And so I guess they were trying to figure out if the numbers actually match 3%. But we know a lot more now. We just aren't seeing data that indicates especially young children are spreaders. These kids should be in school. There is such a tremendous cost to children to being out of school for this long. And by the way, bars, restaurants, and gyms, we can throw Ross out, that's tweet up here, they're still open. So the places that actually have contributed to spread, bars in particular, and restaurants, actually data shows indoor dining at restaurants has also been problematic. Those places that have been spreading the virus, they're still wide open, but you're going to keep kids from going to school, and then you're going to get outraged when anyone asks you about it. And by the way, let's not forget, as we've covered extensively on this show, hero governor Andrew Cuomo, responsible for the deaths of thousands of seniors with his poor handling, has the temerity to write a book about his incredible handling of coronavirus while the pandemic is still raging. Like, I cannot wrap my head around this guy.
No, nobody can. And look, this is, again, indicative of policy failure. You know why those bars and gyms and restaurants are open? Because they need the tax revenue. The localities do. Yesterday, New York City subway system said they are going to lay off 9,000 workers without federal support. Anybody's taken the subway in the last couple of years, you'll know how much of a disaster that is. They're going to have to reduce transit service by 40 to 50% in New York City. So now what they're going to do is they're going to have to cut MTA. And do you know how many New York City kids go to school on the subway? Like tens of thousands. Also parents in order to go to work. I mean, service workers, people who actually have to still go into work, they're going to get destroyed by this. What we're basically seeing is that these officials and others are being put in this impossible situation where they have to keep these bars and restaurants and other indoor dining locations open. They have to cut infrastructure and services, but then they can close the schools. Look, in Europe, in the places with the hardest lockdowns, they have closed everything else and kept the schools open because they actually follow science. And the real issue is they don't have to worry about the money. That's the thing, is they know their workers have 80% payroll covered, or Germany in the same thing. Many of their restaurants can be closed or open or whatever. They're not worried. They're like, I'm not going to lose my business. And localities are not going to lose their tax revenue. But that's what's happening here. It's just so terrible. And now the cases are spiking. But like I said, socially and economically, I don't think we can go through this again.
Crap
I just don't.
like this completely undermines any credibility that the government has, because people aren't stupid. They look at this and you're like, wait a second. Schools have not been spreading the virus, but you're keeping them closed. But you're allowing bars and restaurants and gyms to stay open.
Right.
Like,
You have to pick which one.
There's no public health basis to this. So I don't trust you anymore, and I'm going to make my own mind up about what I think is safe for myself and my family. And then you couple that with this ridiculous petty beef between Cuomo and de Blasio, which always infects everything and makes everything extra dysfunctional in the state of New York. But you layer on top of all of this response across the country, and I don't have sympathy for de Blasio and Cuomo, let me be clear, but a lot of these state and local officials I actually do have sympathy for, because it is an impossible choice they are facing because of the failures here to do what needed to be done. And it didn't take a rocket scientist. Like, we're not super experts in the field, and we could see what was coming here.
Yes.
You could see that, look, it's unpredictable. No one knew for sure that the pandemic was going to last this long. But from the beginning, we thought, look, you could very easily have a second spike in the fall that follows the trajectory.
What happened with the Spanish flu?
It follows Spanish flu. This is what we know about how viruses work. So this was incredibly predictable. And people here did not put provisions in place to make sure that people could get through not just a month or not just a few months, not just to the summer, but all the way through until we get a vaccine. And now we have so many people who are dying, who have lost their jobs, who are facing despair, who have nowhere to turn as winter descends and the holiday season is here. And by the way, for millions of Americans, unemployment is going to expire the day after Christmas.
December, yeah.
So let's layer that on top of all of this. It's just, I'll never get over the way that this government has failed the people. It really is a failed state.
Yeah.
And people are just left to fend for themselves and do the best that they can.
Eviction moratorium, unemployment, extra unemployment, all expires in December. Then you have huge state and local cuts that have to come by the end of the year. Remember, many states have balanced budget amendments, and so that means they literally have to cut. But ironically, lack of stimulus is defunding the police and firefighters and, all infrastructure and social services.
Congratulations, Mitch McConnell.
Yes,
You're defunding the police.
I know. It's a real victory by a lot of people here in Washington. And this is just social chaos for no reason. Look, the virus was always going to spike this time. Europe, they're having the exact same thing. You don't see huge protests or whatever out in London. Like, there's some, anti-lockdown, whatever. But most British people are fine economically. Same in Germany and same across the developed European Union. And then, don't even get me started in terms of Asia, which was able to completely nip this thing in the bud. It's just a total failure. Everywhere, all the way up and down the line. The federal government is putting all these state and locals into a terrible position, and then they're handling their terrible position terribly, like in the city of New York and in Michigan, and I think in California, too, which we're going to talk a little bit later in the show. And people are, like you said, left to fend for themselves.
Yeah, and Trump is sucking his thumb and crying about the election results and doing absolutely nothing to help anyone at this point
either.
either.
Rage tweeting about the election.
Which is really helping the country through this difficult time of need. Yeah. All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.